My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 58 years old, live alone in a small apartment in Glendale, and I've been cleaning other people's homes for the last 15 years. I wasn't always a cleaning lady. Once upon a time, I was Mrs. Thomas Carter, wife of a successful financial advisor, mother to 2 bright children, and the woman who held the household together like clockwork. But that was a long time ago. Last month, out of the blue, I received a text message from my son, Brandon. It simply read, "Mom, I'm hosting a dinner party for my birthday next weekend. Can you come? Saturday at 7. Brandon hadn't invited me to anything in years. His birthday celebrations usually happen in Aspen, or Cabo, or some luxury resort I couldn't pronounce, much less afford. I always sent a card with a modest gift tucked inside, a gesture rarely acknowledged. But this invitation was different. I texted back right away, "I'd love to. What should I bring?" He replied, "Just yourself. 124 Mulholland Drive." Of course, Brandon and his wife Amber had recently bought a home in the Hollywood Hills. I had only seen pictures on Instagram, sleek glass walls, sharp lines, and million-dollar views of the city below. It was the kind of house I'd cleaned before, but never stepped into as a guest. All week, I worried about what to wear, how to act. I settled on a simple black dress I once wore to a client's funeral. It was the nicest thing I owned. I had my hair trimmed and styled at the mall, nothing fancy. I even bought a small gift, a silver frame I found at a vintage shop, and inside it, a photo of Brandon as a boy, building sandcastles at the beach. It had always been his happiest place. On Saturday, I took the bus as far as I could, then called a rideshare to take me the rest of the way up the winding hills. The driver eyed me suspiciously as we passed rows of luxury homes. "Big party?" he asked. I smiled softly. "It's my son's birthday. He lives here." The house was even more extravagant, in-person floor-to-ceiling windows, designer landscaping, and a long circular driveway filled with expensive cars. I barely had time to catch my breath when the front door swung open. There stood Brandon, tall, poised, dressed in a navy suit that made him look like his father. "Mom," he said, his voice unreadable, "you made it." I stepped forward to hug him, but he didn't return the gesture. Instead, he moved aside and motioned for me to come in. "Everyone's out by the pool," he said. "Everyone?" I asked, suddenly nervous. He nodded. "Just a few friends from work, Amber's family, Dad and Heather too." I swallowed hard. I hadn't seen Thomas or his new wife in years, not since Sophie's wedding, where they sat at the head table while I was tucked near the kitchen with distant relatives. I forced a smile. "Oh, that's nice. I didn't know they'd be here." Brandon shrugged. "Dad helped with the down payment on the house. He wanted to see it." Of course he did. Of course they all did. But no one had thought to ask what I wanted or how I'd feel. Not even my son. Walking through Brandon's house felt like stepping into another world. Modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, ceilings so high they seemed to scrape the sky. I followed him past polished marble floors and glass staircases, my sensible shoes clicking faintly beneath me. I couldn't help but remember the life I used to live. I met Thomas Carter when I was 19, waiting tables while taking classes at community college. He was charming, well-dressed, and 10 years older. When he proposed just 6 months later, I thought I'd been rescued from a life of exhaustion and low tips. We married quickly. 1 year later, Brandon was born. 2 years after that, Sophie arrived. For almost 2 decades, I was the woman behind the man, the planner, the caretaker, the host of every dinner party, every PTA meeting, every family photo. I put aside my own dreams of finishing school, of working in nonprofit advocacy, because someone had to hold the family together. And I was good at it. I thought Thomas appreciated it. I thought the kids felt safe because of it. Then, one afternoon, he came home and told me he was leaving. There was someone else. Someone younger. Someone who made him feel alive again. He moved out the next day. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was blindsided. The house, the car, the savings account Thomas had protected himself with the help of his expensive lawyer. Mine, provided through a low-cost referral, was no match. The settlement was brutal. Child support barely covered groceries, and alimony was gone before I could exhale. I was 43, with no degree, no recent work history, and 2 teenagers who blamed me for driving Dad away. "You let yourself go," Sophie once spat during an argument. No wonder he left. I weighed the same as I did on our wedding day, but Thomas had rewritten the story, and my children believed his version. I found a job cleaning houses through an agency. The work was hard, the hours long, but it paid enough to keep us in the school district. Over time, I built my own list of private clients. Some of the houses I cleaned belonged to old acquaintances, women who used to invite me to charity luncheons when I was Miss Carter. Now they left core lists on marble counters and called me Evelyn like I was the help. Brandon got into UCLA on a scholarship. Sophie went to a private marketing school in Chicago. Both married well. Both built successful careers. And both drifted further and further away from me. Now, they rarely call unless they need something. Meanwhile, I live in a modest one-bedroom. Everything I own has a story: a lamp from a thrift store, a chair from an estate sale, a bookshelf I built myself. It's not much. But it's mine. And no one can take it from me again. The backyard was filled with the sound of soft jazz and clinking glasses. About 20 guests mingled around the infinity pool, holding flutes of champagne and laughing in their sleek, cocktail attire. The city of Los Angeles sparkled beneath us like a postcard. I stood there for a moment, gripping the small gift bag, unsure where to go. Amber, Brandon's wife, waved from across the pool. She was elegant as ever in a red designer dress that fit like a glove. "Evelyn, what a surprise," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. "A surprise?" I asked. "Brandon didn't tell you I was coming." She smiled, a little too tight. "Of course he did." I handed Brandon the gift. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He took it without opening it. "Thanks, Mom. I'll put this inside." He was already turning away before I could say anything else. I searched the crowd for Sophie, but she wasn't there. I hadn't seen her in months. She'd canceled our last 3 lunch dates, work, her husband's family, or a last-minute cold. I sipped the glass of wine Brandon had handed me, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I stood alone on the edge of the terrace, pretending to admire the view. The city lights were stunning, but they didn't warm the hollow feeling in my chest. Henry appeared behind me, just as polished as ever, his silver hair gleaming under the terrace lights. "Evelyn," he said, his voice still low and smooth, "you look well." "So do you," I replied. Then came Heather, his wife of 15 years. She smiled with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Still working with the cleaning company?" I nodded. "Yes, business is steady." There was a pause, awkward and thick. I asked about Sophie. "They're in Paris this week," Brandon replied casually, "joining us again. Fashion week. Work stuff." "Paris?" Sophie hadn't mentioned Paris when she canceled our lunch the week before. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to smile. That's wonderful for her. I wanted to leave. I didn't belong in this world. Their laughter sounded different now, more brittle, more hollow. The language of wealth had changed my children, shaped them into strangers. To them, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a memory they didn't want to frame. I finished my wine quietly, standing like an ornament no one had asked for. And I waited just long enough to be polite before slipping away into the house, looking for a bathroom. Looking for a moment alone to breathe. The hallway was silent, cooled by central air and the absence of welcome. I wandered slowly, careful not to disturb anything, until I came across what looked like a home office. It was minimalist: glass desk, leather chair, a few tasteful sculptures. Everything in this room had a price tag I couldn't begin to afford. I was about to turn away when I noticed a framed photo on the desk. I picked it up, expecting to see a family picture, perhaps even the beach photo I'd gifted him earlier. But no. The frame held an image of Brandon, Sophie, Henry, and Heather posing beside a lavish Christmas tree. They looked perfect, polished, complete. I wasn't in it. My hands trembled as I set the photo back down. The message was clear: I wasn't part of the family they wanted to remember. I heard voices coming down the hallway and stepped out, nearly colliding with a group of young men. Brandon's friends, I guessed. "Sorry," I mumbled, trying to move past. One of them glanced at me and turned to Brandon, who had just joined them. "Is this your mom, the one you told us about?" Brandon's smile stiffened. "Yeah," he said. "This is my mother, Evelyn." I extended my hand. "Nice to meet you." The young man shook it, his grip too strong. "Brandon's told us about your cleaning business. Very entrepreneurial." Brandon forced a laugh. "She's been at it for years." "What's it like?" one asked. "Cleaning for the rich and famous?" Before I could answer, Brandon cut in. She doesn't clean for celebrities or anything, just regular houses. I found my voice. Actually, many of my clients are fairly well known. I've been in more Hollywood homes than some executives. Brandon's face darkened. Mom, don't exaggerate. I'm not, I said evenly. I've built a business that supports me. That's something to be proud of. His friend tried to laugh it off. My mom's an accountant. Boring as hell. There's nothing boring about honest work, I said. Brandon's voice dropped, just loud enough for them to hear. She cleans because she never finished college. She doesn't have many options. His words hit me like a slap. I clean, I said, my tone sharpening, because when your father left us with nothing, I had to find a way to keep you and your sister in school. I clean because it let me be present when you needed me. I clean because it's honest work, and I do it well. The silence was painful. Can we not do this now? Brandon hissed. It's my birthday. Yes, I replied softly, and I've felt unwelcome since I walked in the door. And just like that, the dam inside me cracked. Not out of anger, but clarity. I turned, walked past the infinity pool, past Amber and her picture-perfect guests, and left. No one tried to stop me. Outside Brandon's gate, I stood on the sidewalk with my purse clutched tightly, the city sprawling behind me. The house glowed like a monument to everything I'd once lost. I called a rideshare, slid into the backseat, and turned off my phone as it buzzed with texts. I didn't need apologies. I didn't want explanations. At home, I kicked off my shoes and poured myself a glass of wine. My apartment was small, but it was peaceful, filled with things I chose, not things I settled for. And that night, I decided something. For 15 years, I'd held onto a truth so heavy it warped my spine, kept me silent, kept me sacrificing. But not anymore. I went to the bookshelf and pulled out a small folder tucked inside a hollowed cookbook. Its inside was a name and a number I hadn't dialed in over a decade. I memorized it once just in case I ever got brave enough. And now I was. The man who answered the phone had a voice like stone. Worthington, he said. Mr. Worthington, it's Evelyn Carter. I think it's time we had that conversation. He didn't hesitate. Come by my office tomorrow morning. Lawrence Worthington was my ex-husband's former business partner. Years ago, before everything fell apart, Thomas and Worthington built a financial firm together. But when federal investigations started sniffing around, Thomas sacrificed Worthington's reputation to protect himself. Worthington had reached out to me quietly after the divorce, told me he had evidence proof that Thomas had hidden over $7 million in offshore accounts during our marriage. Money he should have disclosed in the settlement. I refused to use it. I thought protecting Brandon and Sophie from scandal was more important. I thought if I stayed silent, I was being noble. But silence hadn't bought me dignity. It had only bought their contempt. The next day, Worthington's office was everything I imagined: polished wood, leather chairs, a view of the city like a movie backdrop. I kept everything, he said, sliding a thick folder across the table. The documentation, the account numbers, he never knew I found them. I opened the folder. It was all there. Wire transfers, shell companies, statements from banks I'd never heard of. $7 million, and then some. Money Thomas had stolen. Money I'd scrubbed baseboards and toilets without. What do you want to do? Worthington asked. I closed the folder. My voice was calm, clear. I want justice. Not just for me, but for the version of myself I buried 15 years ago. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. Because secrets rot your soul when they sit too long in silence. And mine was finally ready to speak. The following week, I called in sick to my cleaning jobs, a first in 15 years. I had work to do, but this time, it was for myself. I walked into the office of attorney Mitchell Crane, a man whose reputation preceded him. His floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Century City, and the leather chairs in his waiting room probably cost more than my entire apartment. I paid his consultation fee in cash. Then I handed him the folder. He skimmed the document slowly, his expression sharpening. Mrs. Carter, he said finally, you have a strong case. Divorce fraud, especially in California, can reopen a settlement at any time if you can prove concealed assets. I can, I said. That's what this is. He nodded. You could be entitled to half the value of those accounts plus penalties. And if we go further, perhaps a portion of all assets he acquired since then: property, business equity, even the Malibu vacation home. I want all of it, I said. Everything that was mine before he buried it. Are you prepared for the fight? Because this won't be quiet. He'll come after you with everything he has. I smiled. I've spent 15 years cleaning other people's messes. I'm not afraid of dirt. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Jessica Kwan at a small cafe in Venice Beach. She was an investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times, known for unearthing white-collar corruption. I've been waiting for this story, she said, eyes fixed on the folder. I tried chasing it years ago, but it got buried. Not anymore, I said. I explained everything: how I'd stayed silent, why I was done protecting a man who'd built his fortune on lies. She promised a thorough investigation and not a word printed until every detail was verified. It would take weeks. I was willing to wait. By the third day of silence, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Brandon called, Sophie texted. I didn't answer. On the fourth day, Sophie was waiting outside my apartment. Mom, she said, rushing up to me. Where have you been? We were worried sick. She pushed past me into the apartment, her eyes scanning my small space like she didn't recognize it or me. You just disappeared, she said. Brandon said you walked out of his party, and then you wouldn't answer any of our calls. I set my purse and the folder on the table. Something did happen, I told her calmly. I woke up. Sophie blinked. Is this about what Brandon said? He didn't mean. He meant every word, I interrupted. And so did you, in your own way, for years. Her face flushed. That's not fair. No, I said. What's not fair is everything I gave up so you could succeed, only to be treated like an embarrassment. She sat, stunned. I stood unshaken. Your father destroyed this family, I told her. I'm just finally telling the truth. And for the first time, Sophie had nothing to say. 3 days later, the Los Angeles Times published Jessica Kwan's expose. The headline hit hard. Former financial advisor hid millions from ex-wife during divorce, documents reveal. There, in the third paragraph, was my name, Evelyn Carter, the ex-wife who had finally come forward with the truth. The article was thorough, damning, and precise. Jessica had traced the hidden accounts, verified the transfers, and spoken with former clients who suspected they'd been defrauded. It also detailed how Thomas Carter's former business partner, Lawrence Worthington, had taken the fall for crimes he hadn't committed. The fallout was immediate. Thomas's clients began pulling out. The firm issued a press release, and his lawyers scrambled. That same morning, my attorney called. Thomas's legal team is offering a settlement, he said. $3 million, and a promise to make it go away quietly. I laughed. Tell them I want half of everything plus 15 years worth of lost dignity. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto my small balcony. My city shimmered in the distance. A message from Brandon came through. Mom, my job is on the line. Please call me. One from Sophie followed. Jacob's parents don't want to proceed with the baby shower because of the article. Please, we need to talk. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood alone in the night air, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one cleaning up someone else's mess. I was standing in the middle of my own life. And I wasn't ashamed of a single inch of it. Justice had taken its time. But now it had arrived cold, clear, and long overdue. And it had my name written all over it. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to reclaim their voice. Subscribe for more true life stories where silence ends and truth begins.
Sylvia Warren stood at her kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the breakfast dishes when she heard the front door open. The familiar sound of her daughter's laughter drifted in, lighter than air, bright with the kind of joy only newlyweds carried. Sylvia turned, drying her hands on a towel, just in time to see Anna step into the room. She was still glowing in her cream-colored wedding dress, though 3 days had already passed since the ceremony. Behind her came Ryan Parker, her new husband, tall and polished, carrying himself with the easy charm of a man who knew exactly how to win people over. They sat down at the small wooden table where Anna had once done her school assignments. Ryan placed a thick envelope on the surface, his smile never faltering. "This will help us all work together better," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Just some planning for the future, money matters, nothing complicated." Anna nodded eagerly, her eyes shining as if she already believed every word. Sylvia didn't reach for the envelope. She simply stared at it, her chest tightening. Ryan leaned back, still smiling. "You understand, right?" he added. "We want to set up something special for when the babies come." Sylvia's silence filled the kitchen like a heavy fog. She gave no answer, only the faintest curve of her lips that hid the unease building in her stomach. In that moment, she knew something dangerous had just been placed on her table. Ryan's voice carried a false warmth that Sylvia could almost taste, like honey masking something bitter underneath. He tapped the envelope with his fingers, his nails clicking softly against the paper as if urging her to open it. Anna leaned closer, her eyes hopeful, her whole face lit with trust. "Mom, it's just some paperwork," she said gently. "Ryan's been amazing with numbers. You know how careful he is about saving. This is just for us to start building a future." Sylvia folded her arms across her chest, leaning against the counter instead of sitting down. She remembered this same table when Anna was a little girl, bent over her school books, her hair tied up in messy braids while Sylvia corrected spelling words. The memory clashed painfully with the sight of Ryan's folder sitting on the wood. That table had always been about learning and growing. Now it was about contracts and control. Ryan cleared his throat. "Look, I know money can be complicated, but families who plan ahead thrive together. We want to create a family account, something secure for everyone. Babies, homes, vacations. It makes sense, doesn't it?" He spoke smoothly, as though every word had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Anna nodded again, eager to prove she was on his side. "It's just a smart step, Mom. Don't you think?" Sylvia forced a thin smile, though her stomach was knotted tight. She did not want to argue in front of Anna. She had already learned from life that silence could be more powerful than any outburst. So she stayed quiet, studying Ryan's every move, noticing the way his eyes flicked to the envelope as though it held his future. He wanted her to touch it, to claim it as her own responsibility. But Sylvia knew better. The thick paper was not an invitation, it was a trap. Ryan stood and carried his plate to the sink, acting casual, as if they were talking about weekend plans instead of finances. "We're leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow," he added lightly. "Just take a look while we're gone. It'll save time later." His confidence filled the room like a performance he had done 100 times. He kissed Anna on the cheek, gave Sylvia a polite nod, and left the envelope on the table as though it already belonged to her. Anna looked back at her mother, her smile soft and trusting. "He just wants us to be ready, Mom. You understand, right?" Sylvia reached out, touching her daughter's hand briefly, squeezing it once before letting go. She didn't answer. Not yet. The door closed behind them, leaving the house quiet again. Only then did Sylvia pick up the envelope, feeling its weight, heavy, deliberate, dangerous. She placed it back down without opening it, her hands trembling. She knew Ryan was clever, maybe too clever. And in that silence, one truth rang clear: he was already reaching for money that wasn't his. Sylvia sat alone at the table long after Anna and Ryan had gone. The envelope remained in front of her, its edges sharp against the wood, as if daring her to break the seal. She didn't need to. Deep down, she already knew what it contained. Promises of shared futures, carefully disguised legal traps, ways to reach into her life without asking. She pressed her palms flat against the table, steadying her breath. This was not the first time someone had tried to take what wasn't theirs. When her husband passed away nearly a decade earlier, Sylvia had inherited $7 million. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of, a fortune built through years of hard work and quiet investments. But she never told anyone. Not Anna, not the neighbors, not even her closest friends. The number sat quietly in an account hidden under a different name, as if it belonged to a stranger. She had learned the hard way that silence was protection. After the funeral, her brother-in-law had cornered her in the driveway, insisting that half of everything belonged to him. He spoke with arrogance, waving legal documents she hadn't even seen before. It took months of lawyers and sleepless nights to prove him wrong, to keep what her husband had left behind for her and Anna. Since then, Sylvia trusted no one with the truth, not even her daughter. Especially not now. She stood, slid the envelope into a drawer, and closed it firmly. The house was quiet again, sunlight streaming across the kitchen floor. Sylvia touched her wedding ring, still resting on her finger, a habit she had never given up. Her husband's voice seemed to echo in her memory: "Always be cautious, always protect what's yours." She whispered into the empty room, "I won't let him take it," and for the first time in years, her hands stopped trembling. 2 mornings later, Sylvia was wiping down her kitchen counter when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the glass, she saw a young man in a tailored suit, polished shoes, and carrying a sleek black briefcase. He couldn't have been older than 25. His hair was combed with precision, his smile already fixed as though he practiced it in the mirror. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely when she opened the door. "Are you Mrs. Warren?" Sylvia narrowed her eyes but nodded. The young man extended his hand confidently. "David Miller, attorney. I represent Ryan Parker and Anna Evans. I'd like to discuss some important documents with you. May I come in?" Her grip tightened on the doorknob. For a moment she thought about shutting the door, but curiosity urged her to let him inside. She stepped aside silently. David entered as if the house already belonged to him, placing his briefcase on the same wooden table Ryan had used days before. "This," he began, sliding out glossy papers, "is a safety measure. Ryan and Anna have decided to join their finances, a wise step for a new couple. Naturally, this includes family support that could strengthen the account." He spoke smoothly, his words rehearsed, his tone confident. Sylvia didn't sit. She stood with her arms folded, her eyes never leaving the pages. David tapped a section with his pen. "Here, section 7.2, Parent Financial Disclosure and Pre-Inheritance Trust. It simply ensures that any assets you may hold are declared properly. Anna signed yesterday before they left for their honeymoon. We'd like your signature before the weekend." Sylvia leaned closer. The signature on the page was unmistakably Anna's, but rushed, careless, as though she hadn't even read the words. Sylvia looked back at David. "Did my daughter even read this?" she asked flatly. He hesitated for just a second before smiling again. "They're young. They trust each other." Wrong answer, Sylvia thought. She pressed her hands against the table, her voice calm but firm. "Tell Ryan he will have to wait. I don't sign anything without my own lawyer reviewing it first." David blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. He gathered his papers carefully, masking his frustration with another polite smile. "Of course, we'll await your response." When the door shut behind him, Sylvia released a long breath. The war had begun. Sylvia wasted no time. That same afternoon she called the one person she trusted most with matters like this, Michael Reed. Michael had been her attorney for nearly 20 years. He was older now, with thinning gray hair and a voice that carried calm authority. When he picked up the phone, Sylvia didn't bother with small talk. "Something's wrong," she said firmly. "They're pushing papers too fast. Anna just got married and already they're circling me like vultures." Michael listened quietly, the sound of his pen scratching notes in the background. "Do you want me to review the documents?" he asked. Sylvia hesitated, then shook her head even though he couldn't see her. "No, I want you to create something, a decoy." "A decoy?" Michael repeated, surprised. "I need a paper trail that looks real but shows I only received $240,000 when my husband died. A modest inheritance. Nothing more. Put it in an account that looks legitimate but not impressive enough to chase. If Ryan is the man I think he is, he'll dig. And when he digs, I want him to find crumbs, not the feast." There was a long pause on the line before Michael finally spoke. "You always did think 3 steps ahead, Sylvia. I'll draft the documents and set up the account. It will hold water under casual scrutiny, but if he pushes too hard, he'll expose himself." "Exactly," she replied. "I don't want to just say no. I want proof of what he'll do when he thinks no one is watching." By the end of the week, Michael delivered everything. Forged but convincing probate papers, a mock account balance, even a subtle digital trail pointing to the funds. Sylvia placed the folder on her desk, leaving it half open, as though she had carelessly forgotten to put it away. She wanted it to be easy enough for curious eyes to stumble across. That night she sat in her study, the glow of the desk lamp casting shadows across the room. She thought of Anna's trusting face, the way her daughter's eyes softened whenever Ryan spoke. Sylvia's chest tightened. Anna was in love, blind to the dangers she could not see. Sylvia whispered into the empty room, "If he takes the bait, we'll know who he really is." Then she closed the folder and waited for the trap to spring. 3 days later, Sylvia got the first sign that her trap was working. A call came from her bank early in the morning. "Mrs. Warren," the representative said carefully, "we detected an unusual attempt to access one of your older accounts. The request came through a tablet registered under the name Anna Evans. For security, we froze the activity." Sylvia closed her eyes. It wasn't Anna who tried. It was Ryan. He had found the decoy papers and decided to test his luck. He had gone digging exactly as she predicted. Relief and dread mingled inside her. Proof was in her hands, but the cost was her daughter's trust. That evening, her phone buzzed with a message from Anna. "Mom, we need to talk first." "Please don't be mad. Jake said you were mean to him." Sylvia stared at the glowing screen, her throat tightening. Ryan was already moving faster than she expected, turning Anna against her. By the time Sylvia's plan unfolded, she would no longer look like the cautious mother protecting her family. She would look like the controlling widow meddling in her daughter's marriage. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she called Michael. He tried to access the account, she said without greeting. From Anna's tablet, Michael's voice was calm, steady. "That's bold. Or careless. Maybe both. I'll pull the device logs, confirm everything. But Sylvia, be careful. He'll paint you as the villain." "I know," she whispered. Later that night, Sylvia sat alone in her living room, the house too quiet, her hands folded in her lap. She remembered Anna as a child, running barefoot through the backyard, laughing, free. That memory clashed painfully with the reality that her daughter now lived beside a man who saw her as a key, not a partner. Sylvia looked toward the darkened window, her reflection staring back at her. She knew she couldn't lash out. Not yet. Every step forward had to be calm, measured, patient. She whispered to herself, "This isn't just about money anymore. It's about saving Anna before she loses everything." Sylvia chose the setting carefully. Not a noisy diner, not a crowded cafe, but a quiet garden restaurant tucked behind brick walls where rose bushes framed every table. It was the kind of place Anna had loved as a girl, feeding fish in the pond after Sunday brunch. Sylvia booked a private corner, where the air smelled faintly of lavender and the waiters knew how to leave guests alone. She also invited Michael, but introduced him only as a friend from the insurance business. Today his job was to observe and record, nothing more. Ryan and Anna arrived right on time. He wore a pale blue suit, the kind men on television wore to close million-dollar deals. Anna clung to his arm, her cream blouse simple but elegant. Sylvia stood to greet them, kissing her daughter on the cheek and shaking Ryan's hand with the kind of polite smile she had perfected over years of charity luncheons. The first minutes were pleasant, almost deceptively so. They ordered salad for Anna, steak for Ryan, soup for Ryan. Conversation floated around safe topics: the honeymoon trip, lost luggage, a hotel worker lending them his boat. Sylvia listened with practiced interest, her eyes calm, her posture steady. She was waiting. Finally, Ryan leaned forward, folding his hands like a negotiator. "Sylvia," he said warmly, "I want to clear the air. I never meant to pressure you. I just thought we could build something smart together, as a family." He glanced at Anna, who nodded quickly, eager for peace. Sylvia tilted her head. "That's kind of you, Ryan." His smile deepened as he reached into his jacket and pulled out the same folder she had seen before. He placed it gently on the table. "I brought the paperwork again, just in case you had time to reconsider." Sylvia lifted the folder, flipping through a few pages as if skimming, then set it aside. Calmly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a single document of her own. She laid it flat across the table, neat and deliberate. "This," she said evenly, "is my disclosure. $240,000 left, after debts and legal fees. That's all there is." Ryan's eyes scanned the figure, but his smile faltered. For a fraction of a second, anger flashed across his face before the mask returned. Anna leaned forward in shock. "That's all," she whispered. Sylvia met her daughter's eyes. "Your father left debts I never told you about. I managed, I sold the lake cabin. I kept life simple. I just didn't want you to worry." Ryan lifted his glass, forcing a smile that no longer reached his eyes. "I see," he said quietly. The rest of lunch passed with forced pleasantries. They hugged goodbye at the door, but Sylvia watched him carefully. She knew this wasn't the end. Ryan Parker was not a man who walked away empty-handed. That evening, Sylvia sat in her study with the lamp casting a pool of light over the desk. The folder from lunch still lay untouched beside her. She reached instead for her laptop and a stack of USB drives. Anna had sent her dozens of clips from the wedding, some professional, some shaky recordings from guests' phones. Sylvia replayed them one by one, searching for something she could use. Hours passed before she found it. The camera was far across the reception hall, focused mostly on the dance floor. But in the background, Ryan stood among his friends, a drink in his hand. The sound wasn't perfect, yet his voice carried clearly enough. One of his friends asked, half joking, "Did you marry rich?" Ryan laughed, bold and confident, lifting his glass high. "Not yet, but give me a month, you'll see." His friends roared with laughter. Ryan grinned, proud, as though he had already struck gold. Sylvia froze the video, her pulse quickening. There it was, the truth spilling out, not in contracts or accounts, but in his own words. She transferred the clip onto a USB drive and called Michael. "I've got something," she said firmly. Within minutes she sent it to him. His reply came back almost instantly. "This is gold. Combined with the bank logs, it's more than enough." Sylvia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She finally had what she needed, undeniable proof of Ryan's intentions. But she knew evidence alone wouldn't save Anna. Her daughter's heart was tangled in love, loyalty, and denial. This would take more than paperwork, it would take confrontation, and Sylvia was ready for it. The meeting took place the next afternoon in a glass-walled law office downtown. The building itself radiated order and authority, a place where lies were difficult to maintain. Sylvia arrived early with Michael, carrying only her purse and a calm determination. She had dressed carefully, dark blazer, pearl earrings, no nonsense. Today was not about appearances. It was about truth. Anna insisted on coming too. She walked in beside Sylvia, her shoulders tight, her eyes restless. Sylvia could feel her daughter's inner conflict, torn between loyalty to her husband and the creeping suspicion that her mother might be right. Sylvia squeezed her hand once before they entered the conference room. Ryan arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses perched on his head, his black sweater making him look more like a celebrity than a responsible husband. He smiled broadly when he walked in, as though this were just another social visit. But the smile wavered when Michael slid a folder across the table. "Courtesy copy," he said simply. Ryan opened it, flipping through the pages. Inside were screenshots of the attempted bank login traced back to Anna's tablet, timestamps matching the exact night he had tried to access the decoy account. Then came the video still of him at the wedding, glass raised, captioned with his own words, "Not yet, but give me a month." His jaw tightened, his lips pressed thin. "There's no crime here," he said quickly. "You can't prove anything." Michael's voice was calm. "You're correct. Not yet, but what we have is enough to start multiple investigations: identity misuse, financial coercion, fraudulent intent. It could get very public, very fast." Sylvia leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him. "You wanted my money, Ryan. You tried to take it. And you lied to my daughter." She paused, letting the silence weigh heavy. "Here's how this ends. You sign papers ending this marriage. You release Anna from every joint account, every property, every contract. You disappear. No court, no scandal." Ryan laughed bitterly, though the sound cracked. Michael pulled out another folder, thinner but stamped with a law firm's letterhead. "Or this goes to the press. Reporters already know a man boasted about marrying for money. Imagine tomorrow's headline." Ryan's eyes darted to Anna. She didn't flinch. "No," she said firmly, "you did this." The room fell silent. Ryan's bravado crumbled. At last he reached for the pen Sylvia had placed on the table. He signed each page, one by one, his hand shaking. When it was finished, he shoved the papers away, stood and adjusted his sunglasses. Without another word he walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Anna collapsed into tears. Sylvia pulled her close, rocking her gently as she had when Anna was a child. "It's over," Sylvia whispered. "You're safe now." The moment Ryan left, Anna clung to her mother, her tears soaking Sylvia's shoulder. For several minutes neither spoke. The tension that had built over weeks seemed to pour out all at once. Finally Anna pulled back, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. "Mom, I am so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't listen. I doubted you. I let him twist everything." Sylvia cupped her daughter's face gently, her voice soft but steady. "You believed in love. That's not a crime. That's being human." They left the law office together, stepping out into the fading light of the evening. The city buzzed around them, but Sylvia felt a quiet peace for the first time in weeks. Anna walked beside her, no longer holding on to Ryan's shadow, but leaning into the steady presence of her mother. That night they made a simple dinner at home, spaghetti and garlic bread, the kind Anna had always loved growing up. They ate slowly, talking little, letting the comfort of the meal do the healing. Afterward, Anna looked across the table, her eyes still red but filled with resolve. "Is it true, Mom?" she asked quietly. "About the money?" Sylvia paused, then nodded. "Yes, when your father passed, I inherited $7 million. Anna gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Sylvia continued, "I never told you because I wanted to protect you. Money changes people, and I didn't want it to change how you lived your life. Especially not with someone like Ryan nearby." Anna reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "From now on," she said firmly, "no more secrets." Sylvia smiled, tears glistening in her own eyes. "No more secrets." The days that followed were not easy. Anna filed the final paperwork, changed passwords, and cut ties with Ryan completely. It took courage, and there were moments of doubt, but she was no longer alone. Sylvia stood beside her, guiding her step by step. Through it all, Sylvia reflected on what had nearly been lost. Not the money she could have walked away from every dollar if it meant keeping Anna safe. What mattered was trust, the bond between mother and daughter. That bond had been tested, strained nearly to breaking, but it endured. As Sylvia sat on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the trees, she thought about the lesson life had pressed upon her. Sometimes the best way to protect those you love is through silence and patience. Sometimes it takes careful planning to reveal the truth, and sometimes the greatest act of love is simply refusing to let someone you care about be destroyed. She smiled, whispering into the twilight, "We made it through," and in her heart she knew they truly had. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and I had been a wife for 42 years, a mother for 40, and a widow for just 3 weeks when my world collapsed. The man I had shared my life with, Thomas, was gone. I was still learning how to breathe without him when my only daughter, Rebecca, looked me in the eyes and said the words that cut deeper than any blade. 'Mom, you are useless now. Find somewhere else to die.' It felt like the floor vanished beneath my feet. I stood there frozen, watching her fold her arms, her husband Eric standing just behind her with that polished banker's smile that never quite reached his eyes. I had imagined that grief would bring us closer. Instead, it revealed a truth I was not ready to see. To them, I was not a mother anymore. I was an obstacle. They had already brought their suitcases, as if I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome, not the woman who had raised Rebecca, patched up her scraped knees, cheered at every graduation, and stayed up late through teenage heartbreaks. I packed 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. That was what 42 years of marriage and a lifetime of motherhood amounted to. Eric carried my bags to their shiny black SUV while Rebecca checked her watch impatiently, as though my exit was making her late for something more important. My house, the place where I had celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where Thomas and I had built our life, faded in the rearview mirror as the car pulled away. I sat in silence, my heart heavy, my mind screaming with disbelief. Imagine giving your entire life to a family only to be told you no longer belong in your own home. That was my reality. What Rebecca did not know was that this story was not ending in a cheap motel, or with me disappearing quietly. What she did not know was that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. Before I tell you how everything unraveled, you need to understand the life that came before the betrayal. My husband, Thomas Mitchell, was a man of habit and precision. He woke at 6 every morning, read the paper with his black coffee, and believed that numbers never lied. He built his reputation in finance with meticulous care, and though he was sometimes stubborn, I never doubted that he loved me. I met Thomas when I was 23, a young woman with dreams of teaching art. He swept me into his world of order and discipline, promising stability, a home, and a future. I traded my brushes and paints for grocery lists and dinner parties, believing I was choosing love over ambition. And for a long time it felt worth it. We raised our daughter, Rebecca, in a brick house on Willow Lane. I poured myself into making that house a home, while Thomas poured himself into his work. Rebecca was always Thomas's darling. If she wanted a pony, he found a way. When she struggled in math, he hired tutors without hesitation. She wore designer dresses to school dances while I recycled my outfits for years. I did not resent it then. I thought this was what mothers did, sacrifice quietly while their children thrived. When Rebecca married Eric, a young banker with ambition in his eyes, Thomas beamed with pride. Eric was everything Thomas admired: polished, confident, connected. I saw a hint of calculation behind his charm, but I stayed quiet. After all, mothers were supposed to support, not question. When Thomas passed suddenly at 71, my world stopped. He had been my compass, and without him I felt unmoored. Rebecca arrived with Eric, wearing black but speaking with rehearsed sympathy. She told me I could not manage the house alone, not with all those stairs, not with the upkeep, not with the memories. Her voice dripped with concern, but her eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, the value of everything around her. A week after the funeral, she brought glossy brochures of retirement communities, with cheerful photos of silver-haired couples playing cards. She spoke about how wonderful it would be for me to have people my age, activities, no responsibilities. But what she meant was no inheritance to protect, no inconvenient mother living in the house she wanted for herself. Each dinner invitation with Rebecca and Eric became a strategy session disguised as family time. They pressed pamphlets into my hands, cornered me with promises of independence, tried to make me believe that losing my home was gaining freedom. I smiled politely, but inside I felt the ground shifting. And then came the night they arrived with suitcases. Rebecca stood in my living room, her mask slipping just enough to show the cold calculation beneath. "According to Dad's will, I inherited everything," she said. "The house, the investments, all of it. I have been letting you stay here out of kindness. But now, Mom, it is time for you to find your own place." I remember the way the words landed. They did not just bruise, they broke something inside me. For a moment I almost believed her. Almost. Rebecca's confidence was so firm, her tone so cold, that I felt myself shrinking into the background like a guest in my own home. She had rehearsed this moment. Eric stood behind her, nodding, his arms folded, silent but complicit. Within hours my belongings were crammed into 2 suitcases and a small box of photographs. 42 years of life with Thomas reduced to what could fit in the trunk of their SUV. I tried to steady my hands as I carried the box out, but Rebecca watched from the doorway as if timing me. When I paused to catch my breath, she glanced at her watch and sighed. To her, I was already gone. They drove me to a motel on the edge of town, the kind that charged $49 a night and smelled of damp carpet and disinfectant. The sign out front flickered, a neon promise that meant nothing. Eric unloaded my bags, setting them on the sidewalk like discarded luggage at an airport. Rebecca handed me $200 in cash, her fingers brushing mine briefly before she pulled away. "This should cover a few days," she said lightly. "Kevin and I will transfer some funds once we settle the paperwork." She said it as though she were doing me a favor. That night I sat on the thin mattress, listening to voices through the paper walls. I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. My daughter had discarded me like a broken chair. My son-in-law had treated me like charity. And Thomas, the man I had trusted with everything, was not there to defend me. But grief can be deceptive. Beneath the sorrow, a thought began to stir. Thomas had always been careful with documents, meticulous about details. He had once shown me the will himself years ago, insisting I understood what it meant. I remembered the way he tapped the papers with his finger. "I want you secure, Eleanor. That is all that matters." So why was Rebecca claiming everything? Why did her version of the will strip me of the very security Thomas had promised? That night in that cheap motel, the seed of suspicion took root. Something was not right, and I intended to find out. The next morning, I took the crumpled motel notepad and scribbled the only name that came to mind, Henry Caldwell. He had been Thomas's attorney for decades. Henry had guided us through buying the house, setting up insurance, and drafting the first version of the will. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. I clutched my purse, counted out bus fare, and rode 20 minutes into downtown. Henry's office was on the 5th floor of a weathered brick building. When I walked in, his secretary looked surprised, then sympathetic, and ushered me straight through. Henry rose from behind his oak desk, his kind eyes magnified behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Eleanor, my dear," he said. I was beginning to worry. "I tried calling several times, but Rebecca told me you were traveling." Traveling. The word made me choke back bitter laughter. "No, Henry. I have been here all along. And I need to ask you about my husband's will." His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Of course. But surely Rebecca gave you your copy." I handed her several when we concluded the reading. My knees weakened. "Reading?" I whispered. "There was a reading?" Henry pulled a thick folder from his cabinet, his hands moving quickly now. "Eleanor, you were supposed to be there. Rebecca insisted you were too distraught, that she would handle everything on your behalf." That was when I realized she had lied not only to me, but to everyone. She had erased me from the process entirely. Henry slid the document across the desk. I recognized Thomas's signature at the bottom, instantly strong, deliberate, witnessed, and notarized. My heart pounded as Henry began reading. "I, Thomas Edward Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor Grace Mitchell, the following: our primary residence at 142 Willow Lane, with all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts totaling approximately $24 million. My breath caught. $24 million, the house, 70% of everything. Henry's voice grew firm as he continued. To my daughter, Rebecca Mitchell Hayes, I leave $10 million to be held in trust until her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death. If she fails to provide respect and dignity, her inheritance will revert entirely to Eleanor Mitchell. I sat frozen. It was as though Thomas had seen into the future. He had predicted exactly what Rebecca would attempt. And with a single clause, he had armed me with protection. Rebecca had not only lied, she had triggered the very safeguard designed against her greed. Henry leaned forward, lowering his voice. Eleanor, what Rebecca did fabricating documents, withholding your inheritance, this is elder abuse and fraud. She has committed felonies. But Thomas was wise. He left you not only secure but with legal authority to act. The question is, what do you want to do now? For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt strength. I lifted my chin and said quietly, we call the police, and then we call Rebecca. The days that followed moved faster than I could have imagined. Henry contacted the authorities, and soon a detective named Daniel Rodriguez sat across from me in Henry's office, his notebook open, his eyes sharp. Mrs. Mitchell, what your daughter has done is not just a family dispute. It is fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. We will need to gather evidence, but the will is clear. You are the primary heir. Evidence arrived almost too easily. Rebecca had handed me papers with a shaky smile the night she threw me out documents she claimed were proof the estate belonged to her. Detective Rodriguez studied them, then looked up grimly. These are forged. The notary's stamp is counterfeit. The signatures mismatched. This was not a mistake. This was planned. Within hours, the banks froze every account linked to Thomas's estate. Credit cards Rebecca thought were hers suddenly declined. The utilities she had transferred into her name were suspended. All of the wealth she had paraded as her own crumbled like sand between her fingers. At precisely 3:47 that afternoon, my phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed across the screen. I answered, my heart steady. Mom, there's some kind of mix-up with the accounts, she said, her voice tight. The bank is saying everything's frozen. What is going on? Hello, Rebecca. I am sitting in Henry Caldwell's office. You remember him, Dad's attorney. The one who read the real will to an empty chair because you told him I was traveling. Silence. Then a shaky laugh. Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but... I cut her off. I discovered the truth. That your father left me 70% of everything, including the house you tried to claim as yours. And that your inheritance was conditional. Conditional on treating me with dignity. Which means, sweetheart, you just lost $10 million. Her voice turned sharp. That's impossible. Detective Rodriguez leaned closer to the phone. Nothing is impossible about fraud charges, Miss Hayes. We'll be in touch. Rebecca's tone shifted instantly, desperate now. Mom, listen. I was just trying to protect you. You've never dealt with investments with money of this size. I was helping you. Helping me? By throwing me out of my own home and handing me $200 like a tip? No, Rebecca, you weren't helping. You were stealing. I hung up. My hands shook, but not from fear, from release. For years I had been invisible, the wife who cooked and cleaned, the mother who never questioned. But now I was the woman who had just unmasked her daughter's lies. That evening, Detective Rodriguez prepared what he called Operation Justice. The police secured warrants, and the banks prepared statements. Rebecca and Eric's entire lifestyle was about to collapse. The next night, as they dined at a fashionable restaurant, credit cards declined one after another. Witnesses said Rebecca grew pale while Eric argued with the waiter. Minutes later, officers entered and placed them under arrest. Rebecca screamed about false charges, her voice carrying through the dining room. Eric tried to bargain, claiming this was a misunderstanding. But forged documents and stolen assets are not misunderstandings. They are crimes. When I returned to my home the following day, the locks were still the same, but the air felt different. I had walked out as a discarded widow. I walked back in as the rightful owner. Rebecca's designer clothes cluttered the master bedroom. I packed them into trash bags and left them on the porch. Let her collect them when she made bail. As I stood in the doorway, breathing in the silence, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in my life, the house was not Thomas's or Rebecca's. It was mine. Entirely, undeniably mine. For a brief moment, I thought the storm had passed. Rebecca and Eric were behind bars, the accounts restored. The house returned to me. I believed I could finally grieve in peace. But peace has a way of slipping through your fingers when you least expect it. 2 days later, Detective Rodriguez returned with a woman named Caroline Wu, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. She carried a leather briefcase and a look that told me she had already uncovered something I would not want to hear. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've been reviewing Thomas's business records," she began. "There are irregularities. Large payments to shell companies, consulting fees that make no sense, contracts with firms that don't exist." My chest tightened. Thomas had always been meticulous. Surely she was mistaken. Caroline slid rows of documents across the table, invoices, wire transfers, contracts with addresses that led to empty lots. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am afraid your husband was running a money laundering operation." The words struck harder than Rebecca's betrayal. I shook my head. No, Thomas was honest. He believed in rules. He believed in order. Caroline's expression softened but did not waver. "The evidence is overwhelming." This went on for more than a decade. That night, I sat in Thomas's study, my study now, staring at the shelves of neatly labeled folders. How could I have shared a life with someone for 42 years and not known who he truly was? Every birthday party, every anniversary, every quiet dinner suddenly felt laced with secrets. Had I built my life on a lie? The following morning, Henry called me back to his office. With him was a federal agent, a woman named Sophia Martinez. She looked me square in the eye, her voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to listen carefully. Your husband did appear to be laundering money. But that was only half the story. For the past 12 years, Thomas was working as an informant for the FBI. I blinked, certain I had misheard. An informant? Agent Martinez nodded. He pretended to launder money for a powerful crime family, but every transaction, every fake contract, every shell company he reported, all of it to us. His information led to dozens of arrests and the seizure of hundreds of millions of dollars. The money he left you is not criminal. It is legally yours, compensation for his cooperation and his cover. Relief and confusion collided inside me. So Thomas had not been corrupt. He had been brave, secretive, and perhaps reckless, but not corrupt. The man who kissed my forehead each night had also been carrying the weight of dangerous secrets to protect us all. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Rebecca and Eric knew nothing of this. They suspected crimes, but they were wrong about what those crimes meant. They tried to use his supposed corruption to blackmail you, but in doing so they confirmed your innocence and strengthened our case against them. For the first time I felt the ground steady beneath me. Rebecca had underestimated me. Eric had overplayed his hand, and Thomas had left me more than money. He had left me protected. I was no longer just the discarded widow. I was Eleanor Mitchell, the woman holding all the cards. The first night I slept again in the master bedroom. The room felt unfamiliar, as though I were walking into someone else's story. For decades I had arranged the space to Thomas's liking, the books he chose, the furniture he preferred, the colors he wanted. But now, with the truth laid bare and the house secured in my name, I realized I could shape it for myself. The room was no longer his, it was mine. I called a contractor and began to make changes, small at first. I replaced the heavy curtains with light linen, letting sunlight pour in. I cleared out the cluttered study and turned it into an art studio, a space I had long dreamed of, but never allowed myself. The smell of fresh paint mixed with turpentine was intoxicating, reminding me of the girl who once wanted to teach art before life demanded she choose differently. For the first time in decades, I stood before a blank canvas with brush in hand, my heart racing not with fear but with freedom. But it was not just the house that transformed. I realized I carried a responsibility bigger than myself. I had endured betrayal not only as a widow but as a mother. Too many seniors faced the same cruelty, discarded, manipulated, robbed of dignity by the very people they loved most. With a portion of the inheritance Thomas left me, I created the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Elder Justice. We funded legal aid for seniors facing exploitation, sponsored hotlines, and supported legislative change. What Rebecca tried to destroy became fuel for something that could save others. Rebecca wrote to me from prison more than once. In each letter she asked for forgiveness, sometimes with excuses, sometimes with tears smeared across the page. I read a few, then stopped. Forgiveness is not a gift owed, it is a bridge built with truth, and she had not built it yet. Eric's letters never came. Silence was his final act. One evening, as the sun set behind the maple trees in my yard, I stood in my art studio gazing at a self-portrait I had been working on. The woman in the painting stood tall, her face turned toward the light, her shoulders strong. She looked nothing like the widow who once left her home in tears with 2 suitcases. She looked like someone who had taken back her voice, her dignity, her future, and that someone was me. If you have ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or even discarded by the very people you sacrificed everything for, then you understand a piece of my journey. I am Eleanor Mitchell, and I have learned that strength does not vanish with age. It deepens. Betrayal, no matter how painful, does not have to define the end of your story. Sometimes it becomes the spark that lights a new beginning. When my daughter tried to strip me of my dignity in my home, I thought I had lost everything. But what I discovered was that resilience, truth, and courage can rebuild more than walls, they can rebuild a life. I am no longer just a widow or just a mother. I am a woman who chose to stand up, to claim what was rightfully hers, and to create something meaningful out of the ashes. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: the best revenge is not anger or bitterness. The best revenge is becoming everything they believed you could not. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We read every word, and your voice matters.